Happy Ukrainian Independence Day to everybody except for the Russians, who apparently have been hacked by the Ukrainians, showing on Russian state TV the reality of Russia's disastrous invasion of Ukraine. Just what exactly is going on and why would the Ukrainians choose to do this? I'm Paul, U.S. Army combat veteran. Let's do it. By the way, hit the subscribe button if you haven't already. So yesterday was Ukraine's Independence Day, celebrating the 30 plus years where Ukraine has existed as an independent state. And one of the things I always like to remind people is that for Ukraine, when they lived under Soviet domination, it was not something that they wanted or asked for or desired. The Ukrainian people, in their own history, have a bunch of memorials to the Holodomor, which is what they view as a genocidal act by Russia against the Ukrainian people. So when you say, oh, well, when the Russians say the Ukrainians and Russians, we're all one people, we all should get along, the overwhelming majority of Ukrainians say, no, the last time you tried to make us one people, you tried to starve us all to death. So that's part of the reason why the Ukrainian government is so strident in their resistance to this Russian invasion. So what happens, of course, to celebrate Ukrainian Independence Day? Well, hackers allegedly as part of the Ukrainian main intelligence directorate began to broadcast a series of images that I literally cannot show here, of showing the reality of the war, broadcast directly to the Russian public via state TV. And yeah, obviously these hackers blocked the Russian state TV administrators from accessing the server, preventing them from interrupting the broadcast. And at least 50,000 subscribers and viewers from Moscow and Russia's other major region learned about the grim reality of Russia's special military operation, including Ukrainian attacks on Russian oil depots and images of Russian soldiers' burials. Now, what's important is to say that both of these things reflect key Russian messaging to their own public, right? One is that the Ukrainian drone attacks, the Russian state says that they are almost always shot down. They almost never produce meaningful impacts or effects, and that these Russian oil depots, when there are impacts, they are like contained, small, and not interruptive, and not really impactful at all. They'll say, oh, well, those drones just impacted in a field outside the oil refinery, right? They impacted somewhere in the oblast, but not on the oil refinery itself. In reality, though, most estimates place about 10% of Russian oil refining capability has been destroyed by Ukrainian efforts. And so just broadcasting that to say, listen, your government tells you that that they are highly effective at stopping these drones. But reality is that these are strikes on Russian oil depot is highly effective. Similarly, the Russian government also maintains that casualties in this war have been unbelievably low. And the real casualty numbers are much, much higher. And I think it's interesting that they put out these Russian soldiers' burials, which is something that is publicly acknowledged by Russia, right? They say, oh, soldiers are killed. They're like heroes of Russia or whatever. And I think it's kind of interesting that they would not accompany it with statistics, particularly leaked U.S. intelligence estimates, which are aligned with the Ukrainian intelligence estimates, in fact, that say that, the actual number of Russians killed in action in this war is close to 400,000 or 500,000. And for context, that is that would put that as one of the largest Russian cities in the country. Let's see if we can find it. Here we go. Here's a list of largest Russian towns and cities by population. So you can see here that the Russian casualties, if you were to place it, let's use the 2021 census here. If you were to place the Russian casualties and put them all in a single city, it would sit between Sevastopol and probably the Tiver, right? So, or possibly the entirety of Mariupol, if you prefer that. And this is, or the city of Kursk, actually, that's probably one of the best contexts, right? And the takeaway that I think someone should have from this is to say, listen, this is something that should be stunning and disturbing to the Russian public. But it's hard because, as we've talked about on this channel, part of Russia's strategy is to recruit from very poor regions and particularly linguistic and ethnic minorities. And so I would wonder, right? The Russian public will never admit in a survey that they don't support the war effort or that they oppose it in some way. And part of that is a function of the fact that public opinion surveys are used by the government as tools to identify potential dissidents. And so all of them will say, I love Putin. Putin is great. Putin is the best. But the fact is that I think a lot of Russians are actually okay with it because, well, Russians, I mean, like the Russians believe in the superiority of the Russian people. And if you're someone from the Far East, you are maybe more Asian in appearance, you speak a different language, maybe you practice a different religion, like if you're from the Caucasus, you know, they are dying, right? It's different from when we are dying. And as long as they are dying and we, the Russian public, the wealthy metropolitan, cosmopolitan Russians, as long as we are not dying, the Russians seem to be kind of okay with it. So maybe just a bunch of Russian funerals is the best way to go. But I think the real signaling device of this, and in a lot of cyber attacks, is to demonstrate impotence. And what I mean by that is that part of the Russian state's narrative is that the Russian military is highly effective. The Ukrainians are highly ineffective. Russia is dominating NATO because in their narrative, they're fighting all of NATO. And that the Ukrainians are powerless. And so by sitting there and saying, listen, the Ukrainians on a day of our choosing, right? Their Independence Day. So it's not like they just took advantage of a little hole in Russian state TV when it briefly emerged. They said, no. We could have done it any day we wanted. We chose our own Independence Day to let you know that we have the power to choose when we do these things. And we've chosen our own Independence Day. And we have reached out into your TV station and went and said hello to every single TV set in Moscow. And that's powerful, right? But Russia understands this power because, frankly, they leverage it too. You can see here, just 5 days ago, the FBI put out a broad warning of Russian attacks targeting U.S. critical infrastructure. Particularly, these are Russian cyber espionage units. This is a military hack, not just a random Russian crypto scamming group. I've been targeting a vulnerability over the last year in Cisco software systems to target networking devices with critical infrastructure's IT systems. Hackers working with the FSB are able to essentially tap into what they call critical infrastructure. This is generally energy, water, telecommunications, higher education, manufacturing sectors, selected sectors based on strategic interest to the Russian government. And this is a interesting kind of function because it shows, again, that while in the United States, we draw a bright line. We say, listen, over here are companies that that this is the private sector, right? These companies are private entities that are responsible for their own security. And over here is the public sector. Over here is the army and the CIA, and over here the government protects, and over here the government lets the free market decide. And again, one of the things that the Trump administration, again, I'm not like people are like, you're a turbo Trump hater. I'm like, if he governs well, if the administration governs well, I call it. Lots of the stuff Pete Hegseth has done around modernization and sort of preparing the U.S. military to fight and win today's war, I support. I support him closing down a lot of Army air units that would get torn to shreds, right? Credit where credit's due, right? And I think it's correct. It is directionally correct for the administration to say, listen, there are some sectors of the U.S. economy that are so key that we as the government have to sort of put our thumb on the scale and say, we want to see these things happen, right? Now, is taking an actual literal ownership stake of a failing company like Intel the right way? Probably not. Generally, when the government decides it's going to prop up an industry, that's a little Venezuelan, right? Because remember, the Venezuelan state decided to prop up its failing, inefficient oil industry, and that's how you ended up with one of the most oil-rich countries in the world still going absolutely bankrupt. So I think they're spot on, and the Russians understand this intuitively, right? They say, of course, because they they spent 100 years as a centrally planned economy. So they sit there and go, listen, the U.S. universities that do research into networking, social media, influence operations, even education, like even research universities that research like advanced materials or physics and electromagnetism. These are as valuable to them as hacking into the CIA itself, right? Similarly, manufacturing sectors, if they can say, listen, we want to know how NVIDIA makes your most advanced AI chips. They don't see a difference between hacking NVIDIA to learn about AI chips and hacking the NSA to find a spy satellite. And again, in the US, obviously, who's going to be easier to hack? A private company who's always trying to run operations as cheap as possible for shareholders, or the CIA, who will spare no expense to protect their information and security. So again, there's a literal value to this, but also this is part of the Russians' objective, is to tell the United States, to tell everyone that works in businesses, to say, listen, we can reach out and touch your country. Your government is so impotent to protect you. We can touch you at any time we want, at the time, place, and manner of our choosing. And it's true. Look in your own life. Do you know someone or a business that you work with that's been hacked by Russian-based hackers? Yeah, for sure. My wife worked at a hospital that was hacked by the Russian state-backed hackers, and it was a disaster. And the U.S. government did fuck all about it. And like, that's a symbol that diminishes my trust in the government's ability to keep us safe from even a threat like the Russians, let alone its sophisticated advanced threats like China. So again, this is cool, but it's not about what you show. It's about when and where you show it to and who sees it. Have you guys become a member at combatvetnews.com? Get access to exclusive uncensored combat footage and Q&As and an archive of videos going back to the start of the war. It's members only. It's like my Patreon. So if you want to support me, become a member over there. Plus, a huge thank you to our Combat Vet News members like James J21, Yanko Georgiev, Chris Gorsuch, Paul Templeton, Cytronic, Steve Rantier, Need, Alan Knutson, CM Holmes, and all of our Lieutenant tier members. Thank you guys so much. I couldn't do it without you guys. And I'll catch you in the next one.